Tarnopolsky joins us live. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, who's up, who's down in the Israel elections?
Benjamin Netanyahu is back big time.
Now, is this a surprise? Explain to people if they haven't been following Israeli politics. They'll know the name Benjamin Netanyahu. Explain the ups and downs of recent times.
Well, I mean, I think it's undeniable that Netanyahu is by far the most dominant force in Israeli politics. And he was prime minister for a period of 12 years that ended about a year ago when his coalition fell apart for many reasons. But one of them is that the guy's on trial for corruption, bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And he, at the time that his trial opened, which was 2020, he went on a sort of a rampage, and he said that the judiciary and the police were executing a coup d'etat against him. And somehow all of politics around that period became really radicalized around him, and to what an extent he and the state are one. And there were several rounds of elections. And a little over a year ago, a sort of Danish coalition coalesced in Israel. So for the past year and a bit, in Israel, we've had a fragile and unusual coalition of people who basically agreed that democracy was worth saving and that Netanyahu on trial could not be prime minister. But apart from that, ranged from Islamists to mainstream right wing to a very left wing. And that coalition fell apart around in June, and we had a fifth round of elections yesterday. And due to Israel's very fractured politics, many small parties running, the ones more on the left appear to have basically failed to pass the electoral threshold. And this gives Netanyahu an even more solid majority than he won through the straight out elections.
And so what will happen now?
Well, a few things could happen. But Netanyahu's number one priority is to try and get his trial canceled. He and his people want to make fraud and breach of trust no longer crimes in the state of Israel. They want to pass also a law that will prevent any minister, forget prime minister, any minister from being able to be investigated or indicted while in office. They're talking about very far-reaching reforms. The most far-reaching is a law that would allow the parliament with a single vote to overrule the Supreme Court. So if Netanyahu manages to form this extremist government that it appears he has in his hands to form in the next few days or weeks, Israel can look forward to pretty radical changes in the administration of the state. And I think that would happen fairly quickly, and I think it would be far-reaching. But
there's always a but. Go on.
Yeah, there's a but, because this motley crew who make up this extremist party, who call themselves religious Zionism, they're not really a party. They're an amalgamation of random fringe elements that Netanyahu kind of crushed together to make a party because he didn't want to lose these fringe right-wing votes. And now he has a Frankenstein on his hands. And one of their leaders is demanding to be Minister of Police. This is a guy who's the only Israeli legislator ever convicted on terror charges. He's a guy who likes pulling out a gun when there are Arab citizens around. So, you know, I think we may be in for a bumpy ride. I'm not sure Netanyahu's own party members are going to smoothly accept the sort of ministries he's going to have to give these extremists if they're really going to join him. So we have to see what happens.
We will indeed. Really good to speak to you, though. Noga Tarnopolsky. Thanks so much for joining us, updating us on those elections in Israel. See, it's not just our politics which is mad. It turns out it's happening right around the world. Right, PMQs Unpacked is coming live. If you're watching along already on the YouTubes, nice to have you with us. We're already live. They put the camera on without telling me. I could have been doing anything. Go on live right now. There are 100 people already watching. Patrick Maguire's already here. Go on, let's do some more of our tea stories.
Just tea for two and two for tea. Just me for you and you for me alone.
Yeah, the price of tea is going up, apparently. Tea bags, milk, sugar is all up. So I'd ask for your tea stories. We had a great one earlier. Somebody offered Jason Donovan a cup of tea. and said, especially for you. Gary's been in touch, saying, as a junior diplomat, I was asked to check whether Kofi Annan wanted tea or coffee. Of course, I said, coffee? He rightly looked at me with Jason Donovan levels of contempt, so there you go. That's great. Ken says, my wife brought me what was essentially a cup of hot milk this morning. Luckily, she doesn't listen to Times Radio. What do you mean, luckily? I also had a real shocker when lighting a doom metal show in Islington Mill. Earl Grey with almond milk. You're just sending me stories of the worst cup of tea you've ever had. Vienna on Twitter says, famous person I made tea for, David Essex. When I worked at Polygram, he said, thanks, love. Lovely. Nora says, in the worst tea category, I ordered a mint tea in a cafe in New York. The servers, hearing my accent, assumed I'd want milk in with it. So I automatically added milk to mint tea. And, of course, I drank it uncomplainingly. Katie says, worst tea ever, anywhere in the US, always Lipton's, dripped in lukewarm liquid. And Anna says, working in Woolworths, I visited a branch. The manager put a mug of water in a microwave for a minute, added a tea bag, pulled a teaspoon from his pocket, licked it.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
We'll never know what happened to that cup of tea. It's Matt Chorley on Times Radio. It is now at 12 o'clock. PMQs Unpacked is coming next. Let's first take a look at the headlines this lunchtime. Rishi Sunak has confirmed he is now going to the COP27 climate summit in Egypt. The Prime Minister originally said he'd be staying in the UK to focus on economic challenges. Will it come up at PMQs? We'll find out in just a moment. The police watchdog says it's sure forces will make improvements to vetting procedures. It comes after a report by His Majesty's Inspector Constabulary found some officers in England and Wales who are alleged to have committed serious crimes. Conservative MP and Home Affairs Committee member James Daly says he'd welcome moves to speed up the deportation of failed asylum seekers from Albania. So the government wants to send them back to the country, classed as safe, before the decision can be appealed. And North Korea has fired at least 20 missiles off its eastern and western coast. Pyongyang's accused South Korea of rehearsing an invasion. Now we'll have a full news and sport roundup at 12:30. Now it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Matt Chorley and Patrick Maguire.
Yeah, very good afternoon to you. It is PMQs Unpacked. Patrick Maguire is here, Red Box Editor. How are you?
I'm very well, Matt.
Nice to have you.
Well, I've recovered from my stint in your big chair,
And it was a very strong stint. It was too. I listened actually to PMQs Unpacked last week.
Yeah, I'd say it was slightly less zany than our encounters, me and Tim.
Tim Shipman does fewer impressions.
Yeah, he does.
It turned out.
He's a serious man for serious times.
But I have to say, and I was listening to him, I was walking through the streets of London on the way to an awards lunch, which I don't need to get bogged down in because clearly didn't win anything. They were both quite strong, I thought. Keir Starmer was quite punchy in his questions, and Rishi Sunak was quite punchy in his responses. He was.
It was a Rishi Sunak we've seldom seen before. Rishi Sunak in attack mode. The last time we saw Rishi Sunak in attack mode was during that disastrous BBC debate in Stoke-on-Trent during the first leadership campaign of this year. It didn't go well for him. It's not a register that really suits him, but I think he succeeded in uniting the party behind him. It'd be interesting to see whether he takes the same gambit this time, given how tumultuous the past week has been. I would imagine Keir Starmer is probably going to go on Suella Braverman and the Home Office again, and there's plenty to go into on
as he did last week.
Yeah, exactly.
One interesting thing, obviously we've got the news this morning, Rishi Sunak is going to COP27, having been the slight hokey-cokey. He was, and then he wasn't, then he was, then he wasn't, and then Boris Johnson was, and now he is as well. I was a bit surprised he didn't wait for Keir Starmer to raise it. And then, there's nothing better at PMQs than someone standing up saying, it's an absolute disgrace. What will you go to COP27? You just stand up and say yes and then sit down.
Yes, and then Keir Starmer's five questions. 5
questions on it all have to be torn up.
And, series of global warming related one-liners straight on the cutting room floor.
Instead, Keir Starmer could recast what he was going to say and say that, he's a flip-flopper, he can't make up his mind. He's following Boris Johnson around the world. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see whether, as well, I haven't spoken to anyone in Keir Starmer's inner circle this morning, negligently. But last week, we had Rishi Sunak getting quite close to the territory where you might be reasonably accused of misleading the House over what he knew and when over Suella Braverman. So I imagine Keir Starmer, forensic as he is, I think everyone can agree on that, and his parliamentary performances might try and pin Rishi Sunak down on some specifics, but I'm looking forward to being proven wrong in the next 2 minutes.
Because the interesting thing with that was Rishi Sunak said last week that Suella Braverman had raised the issue of accidentally sending an email to someone she shouldn't have done. And the point was she did, but by that point everyone knew about it. The Chief Whip knew about it, the Downing Street knew about it, Liz Truss knew about it.
And the wording, that sort of wording does lead one to infer that it was a proactive thing on Suella Braverman's part rather than a post hoc. Well, obviously, if you're going to reappoint me Home Secretary, we should probably have a brief chat about that massive controversy that got me sacked from this job 6 days ago.
Yeah. The other thing, of course, we could probably have to brace ourselves for is some Matt Hancock jokes.
Yes.
I mean, are there any left that haven't been done?
No, I don't think there are. Genuinely, I don't think there are. I didn't even try and Redbox this morning because it's pointless.
Yeah, we did a little bit earlier. Now I've drawn a line under it. So here we are. That is PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Listening along on the radio. Don't forget you can watch along on the YouTubes. Hello from Penge, says Mark. Paul is in Lincolnshire. It's wet and windy in Yorkshire, says Roy. Rosie says his Rishi's trip to Egypt is copping out from Cruella. That's an interesting point. Hello from Portsmouth. Hi from Lithuania, says Martin. Pennsylvania, you're all listening in. Here we go. Isle of Wight, says Benjamin. Right. Question number one, then let's go live to the House of Commons. This is Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His Home Secretary says the asylum system is broken. Who broke it?
A short, sharp question from Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's just we can look at the record on migration policy. Let's look at it. What did we on this side of the House do? We gave the British people a referendum on Brexit. We delivered Brexit. We ended the free movement of people, Mr. Speaker. That's our record on migration policy. It's not something the honourable gentleman supported. He opposed it at every turn, and it's not what the British people want.
It's not a slightly peculiar answer. Suella Braverman is on the front bench. She's out of shot, although the camera does keep helpfully cutting.
She was barracking Keir Starmer
across the splash box. Let's look at our record, and he just said we done Brexit.
We did Brexit. I did Brexit. He might reasonably say, having backed Brexit from the start, despite pressure from his superiors in 2016. It's a question that rather ignores the reality of the situation. It's rather an answer that rather ignores the reality of the situation, because despite people having voted for Brexit, and the polling on this is quite interesting, right? You're seeing an uptick in concerns about migration having fallen sharply.
Really sharply.
Since 2016, because people thought, well, this is resolved now.
We've taken back control.
And now...
And there is a real risk, isn't there, that when the government... And I thought it was a smart question from Keir Starmer. When the government says the thing is broken and you've been in power for 12 years, and presumably by this point you've gone through all of your ideas about how you might fix it. And so Rishi Sunak saying he's happy to stand by his record. Well, his record is a broken asylum system, and taking back control hasn't worked. Yeah, and actually there is some arguments. You start talking about Dublin and when we were in the EU, the ability to send people back to the country they come from was actually easier. But it's hard to argue that Brexit has helped the situation, and some people might say it's made it worse.
Yes, exactly. And it'd be interesting to see where Keir Starmer goes next, and indeed where Rishi Sunak goes next. I can't imagine it'd be long before we get reference to lefty lawyers, perhaps like a certain Casey, who lives in Kentish Town.
And there's also a thing I'm slightly struck by, and I was struck by it last week as well with Rishi Sunak. He does this sort of like laughing, let's take a look at our record. And last week he was getting them to sort of cheer. When Keir Starmer asked him about the tape of him saying he was going to cut money from Labour areas and give it to Tories. And he said, well, I know he doesn't get out of North London, but we've got poor areas in the countryside. And they all went, hooray! And we've got poor areas in the north. And hooray! Like, as if, again, you've been in government for a long time. It's a
sort of shades of Tiswas about his delivery.
Yeah. But anyway, let's see if... early data. Let us know how you think it's going. Post a comment on the YouTube channel. Let's go back to the House of Commons then. It's question 2 from Keir Starmer.
No one wants open borders on this side of the House. They've lost control of the borders on their side of the House. Mr. Speaker, four Prime Ministers in 5 years, and it's the same old, same old. He stands there and tries to pass the blame. If the asylum system is broken, and his lot have been in power for 12 years, how can it be anyone's fault but theirs?
Mr. Speaker, people rightly want to see us getting a grip of migration in our borders. But look, let's look at the record. Let's look at the record. The right honourable gentleman, he voted against the Nationality and Borders Bill. He said he would scrap the Rwanda partnership. He opposed the ending of free movement of people. Look, border control is a serious, complex issue. But not only does the party opposite not have a plan, they have opposed every single measure we have taken to solve the problem. You can't attack a plan if you don't have a plan.
I mean, you can.
The interesting thing about this exchange is that Rishi Sunak, or rather successive Conservative governments, have got the asylum system into a position where Labour can outflank them from the right.
Yeah.
Whether they can do so successfully, if the rejoinder from Rishi Sunak is, well, Labour have voted against every attempt we've made to toughen up our borders, is a moot point and will come out in the wash of an election campaign. And
although there's an argument for saying, I mean, we'll see what Keir Starmer, how he responds to that. It's like, well, it's not worked. Yeah, we voted against your plan and they haven't worked. And, you know, there could be an argument about why they haven't worked. But on the face of it, you said you voted against our plans. Well, they're not working. So, you know, the Rwanda policy isn't working in as much as it's not deterring people and nobody's been sent to Rwanda.
But it's a very stark illustration of the scale of the political problem the government is facing here, that the Labour Party, which isn't especially comfortable talking about this, when you speak to shadow cabinet ministers in weaker moments and ask them who are the low wattage members of your shadow cabinet, who isn't making an impact, names we'll have heard lots over the past 2 years have been Yvette Cooper, the shadow Home Secretary. Her predecessor, Nick Thomas-Symonds, was also considered not to have delivered in that brief or really landed a blow on Priti Patel, hence his being shuffled to international trade last year. And despite all of that and the tensions in the grassroots and Labour's caution on these big ticket issues, beyond saying they're pro-Brexit now, they are still able to outflank the Conservative Party from the right, at least rhetorically.
It's probably a conversation on that. There's something really interesting about Yvette Cooper, because she was Shadow Home Secretary for 4 years up against Theresa May and did such a good job of demolishing Theresa May's reputation that she went on to become Prime Minister.
Yeah.
That Labour's ability to attack on home affairs in a way that David Davis, for instance, when he was Shadow Home Secretary, got through countless Home Secretaries by making the news and driving the story instead of sort of commenting on it in a way that the Yvette Cooper. It might be that this particular issue, the migration thing, is so insoluble that all you can really do is sort of tut and comment on it. Well, there's one of the things interesting about Rishi Sunak is he's owning the record. He's saying, let's talk about our record in a way that is a departure from Liz Truss.
Yes, definitely. You know, it's not year zero. And that's the only thing you can do if you're in the business of party unity, I think.
Yeah. One thing we should point out, if you're watching along on YouTube, you'll know this. But if you're listening in, lots of MPs are wearing corn, wheat. A wheat pit. It's like a sheaf of wheat on their lapel. Rishi Sunak doesn't appear to have one on, but everyone else seems to have one on. It's part of NFU's Back British Farming Day, apparently. The iconic wheat sheep badge is representative of the celebratory spirit of Back British Farming Day. It's made from wheat sourced from farms in Shropshire and wool from Devon's blue-faced Leicester sheep, which has been spun and dyed blue and red.
Fascinating. The farmers of the Yorkshire Dales will not forgive Rishi Sunak for his display of treachery here, will they? His neighbours in North Yorkshire.
Anyway, we'll go back to the House of Commons then. See if you can spot who is and isn't wearing a sheaf of wheat. It's question number 3 on PMQs Unpacked.
We voted against it because we said it wouldn't work, and it hasn't worked. He says he's getting a grip, he's got a plan. So let's have a look at that plan. The Rwanda deal was launched in April. It cost the taxpayer £140 million and rising. The number of people deported to Rwanda is 0. Since then, 30,000 people have crossed the channel in small boats. It's not working, is it? He hasn't got a grip.
Mr. Speaker, we on this side of the House are clear that we want to defend our borders. When the Shadow Home Secretary this weekend was asked, she couldn't answer a simple question if the party opposite was in favour of higher or lower migration. It's that simple. The Home Secretary and I, when it comes to tackling on migration, reducing migration, we are on the same page. That party's policy, it's a blank page, Mr. Speaker.
There's an emerging sort of theme to this, and I know there's a bit of this last week as well. Keir Starmer trying to pin on Rishi Sunak. Nothing's working. You've lost your grip. Rishi Sunak's response being, well, you don't have a plan.
Yes, you don't have a plan, and that's because your instincts are... You're concealing your real instincts, which are those of milquetoast North London liberals. And I think you can detect the influence of Michael Gove back in these PMQs prep sessions, because those attack lines are very sharp and, internally consistent in a way Liz Truss's definitely weren't, and in a way that Boris Johnson's were, clearly authored by Boris Johnson.
It's interesting, though, Keir Starmer not really asking proper questions. That last one was, it's not working, is it? He's got to get a grip. But now that's question 3. There's quite a lot of specific detail he could be going on, whether it is, did Suella Braverman sign off on hotels? When did she start doing it? Why is it only happening now? Or you could go on the emails. Did he mislead the House last week? They managed to get rid of Boris Johnson over allegations he misled the House. Does Rishi Sunak, what he said last week, match what Suella Braverman has admitted since? It's just, so far it's just been sort of generic sound bites. You're rubbish, and then he says, no, we're not.
Which it's an interesting question. What is more effective if Labour wants to land and solidify the message that this government is chaotic, is in disarray, it's feckless and incompetent, to use the language Tony Blair used about a Conservative government in a similar stage of its life in the mid-90s? Is it by trying to stitch Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak up with parliamentary questions like the ones you just mentioned, where you can potentially get them on a technicality and get someone to potentially mislead the House or expose new detail? Or is it relentlessly plugging away at the same message and trying to get that to stick in the minds of the public? I think Labour in the past 6 to 8 to 12 months have made a decision that actually they need to hone a message.
Yeah, and just keep hammering away at it.
And keep hammering away at it.
And then when a clip is taken for the news, it doesn't matter which one it is, because it's all got the same messaging. Let's go back then. You're listening to Matt Chorley on Times Radio with Patrick Maguire, Times Red Box editor. It's PMQs Unpacked. Go back to the House of Commons. Question 4 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, blame others, deflect, attack on something else. So much the new age of accountability. Of all the people who arrived in small boats last year, how many asylum claims have been processed?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we do need. Mr. Speaker, not enough is the answer, very straightforwardly. Not enough. And that's what we're going to fix. But the honourable gentleman raises this question. What are we doing? We've increased the number of processing officials by 80%. We are putting an extra 500 more by next March. But if he really was serious about fixing this problem, then he would acknowledge that we do need to tackle the issue of people putting spurious claims, spurious, repeated, last-minute claims to frustrate the process. That's how we'll tackle the system. So why, then, did he vote against the Nationality and Borders Act, which deals with it?
Well, there we are. A more specific technical question from Keir Starmer, having sort of laid the politics on it. How many asylum claims have been processed for those who arrived in boats last year? I think it's fair to say Rishi Sunak doesn't know.
Rishi Sunak doesn't know, and in any case, the number will be much, much bigger. Sorry, much, much smaller than the Conservative Party would like. But then the rejoinder from Rishi Sunak is, well, what are you going to do about it? Labour is now in that territory. We're now in the position where Labour cannot rest on a 30-something point poll lead, or it's diminishing with every Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, but still in majority territory. And this is why it's quite a tricky situation. It's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other for the Labour Party, isn't it? Well,
it was interesting because I spoke to James Daly earlier on, Conservative MP, member of the Home Affairs Select Committee, supporter of Suella Braverman, and made this point to him. He was complaining about £50 million being spent on hotels. Well, the answer is actually you're going to have to spend more money. You need to recruit more people to process these claims. And then over time, you'll bring down the number of people who are in hotels. Whereas if it seems to have been the case with Suella Braverman, if your starting point is to just be cross about spending money on hotels and you think the solution is to cut the amount of money on hotels, you just end up with loads of people in Manston. They're still not being processed. and it's not tackling the problem.
Yes, exactly, and which is why the internal politics of this Rishi Sunak are quite difficult, because you saw this from Jonathan Gullis, the Tory MP for Stoke North, the other day on a broadcast news outlet, complaining about asylum seekers being housed in a hotel in his constituency, and others are making similar complaints. No Conservative MP wants that in their constituency, but as you say, short of proposing an alternative solution that involves spending money on something else, that sort of hot-headed rhetoric isn't going to solve anything.
So it'll be interesting to see. Well, I suppose the main point is at the moment, you're right, Keir Starmer's doing well in the polls, but if the government doesn't have a plan that works, asking Keir Starmer to come up with a plan, it's a sort of, they're both as bad as one another, I suppose, to some extent, except one's been in power.
Obviously, the point it's not leader of the opposition's questions, as Lindsay Hoyle would often say.
Yeah.
But Labour are now in the political territory, as on the economy.
It has changed.
As on the economy, right? Yeah. They cannot afford, because then you'll get into an election campaign and they'll be unsteady on their feet on these very questions.
Yeah.
So they need before an election campaign, need to at least have something to say.
And it was interesting, the point that Rishi Sunak was making. I think it might have been on Times Radio on Sunday that Yvette Cooper was on with Adam and Kate and was asked about, do you want immigration to be higher or lower? She just couldn't answer that question. She talked about, well, what we want is a different system, and it's a points-based system.
I wonder what, Rishi Sunak answered that question in the same way that, every Tory leadership candidate swore fealty to the Rwanda plan. That was one of the great articles of faith in the first leadership election of this year. If you were to ask ministers, do you want immigration to be higher or lower? I think most of them privately would say, well, we actually need to move away from that binary way of looking at it, because sector by sector.
The whole point of that, the Suella Braverman email that she sent to somebody who wasn't John Hayes' secretary, was about a written ministerial statement, which under Liz Truss's plan was about increasing the number of people coming into the country for low-skilled work, and basically to bump up the OBR numbers for growth.
Yeah, and ministers in every other department will say, well, hang on, I'd actually like more, for instance, Spanish broadband engineers is one Nadine Dorries had a bee in her bonnet over.
Yeah.
And then the
Department of Health wants some more doctors.
Yes, exactly.
Department for Transport wants some more people to build the railways.
And Suella Braverman, hence why she's a darling of the right of the party, has become Whitehall's Dr. No on that sort of thing. But it's not necessarily a sustainable way of managing the country's immigration system, like other ministers would tell you.
There we are. Let's go back then to the House of Commons. Let's see if Keir Starmer knows the answer. I suspect he might do, to his question of how many asylum claims have been processed for those who arrived in boats last year. This is question number 5 from Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, he says not enough. You could say that again. It's 4%. 4% of people arriving in small boats last year had their asylum claim processed. According to the bookies, the Home Secretary has a better chance of becoming the next Tory leader than she has of processing an asylum claim in a year. And he talks about numbers. They're only taking half the number of asylum decisions that they used to. That's why the system is broken. 4,000 people at the Manston Air Force Base, massively overcrowded, all sorts of diseases breaking out. So, did the Home Secretary receive legal advice that she should move people out? Yes or no?
Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman is very fond of reminding us that he used to be the former Director of Public Prosecutions, so he knows the government's policy on commenting on legal advice. But what I can say is the significant action that the Home Secretary has taken to fix the issue. Since September, 30 more hotels with 4,500 new beds, appointing a senior general to control the situation at Manston, and indeed increasing the number of staff there by almost a half, Mr. Speaker. These are significant steps to demonstrate that we are getting a grip of this system. But this is a serious and escalating problem. We will make sure that we control our borders, and we will always do it fairly and compassionately, because that's the right thing.
There's just part of me that thinks that Rishi Sunak needs to calm down. That voice, he can't sustain that voice, can he?
I also don't think it necessarily suits him, this register. Although, what else can he do?
But then to sort of round it all off, we're getting tough. We brought the generals in. It's all part of a fair and passionate and friendly and cosy immigration policy.
Well, look, he's got a vociferous parliamentary coalition to manage, and he's got a rapidly disintegrating electoral coalition to manage, and I think that is reflected in some of the sort of discordant rhetoric he's using there, isn't it? It's both fair and compassionate and incredibly tough. So everyone from Lee Anderson to the Bankery shops at Waitrose in Esher and Walton on a Saturday morning for some quinoa and a copy of the Saturday Times, perhaps even the Saturday Guardian too.
Do they still do that on a Saturday? Do they bother with the Guardian?
They do, yeah. I think it costs about £6 now.
But also, the whole thing was just a bit muddled. This is a serious and escalating problem, but it's also diminishing because we've called in all these. The other really interesting question is he talked about 30 more hotels, 4,500 more beds as a result, as ordered by the Home Secretary. There's an interesting question as to which Home Secretary is responsible for that. Is it Home Secretary Swallow number one, who's accused of not procuring hotels? Is it Home Secretary Grant Shapps,
the supply teacher?
The supply teacher there for 6 days, who supposedly was, pressed into acting and did act. Or is it Home Secretary Swallow number two?
Well, if you read Matt Dathan, our Home Affairs editor's output, there was a line in a recent story of his in which a Whitehall source or a Home Office source said that Grant Shapps had achieved more to solve this problem in 6 days than Suella Braverman had in
6 weeks.
In 6 weeks. So I think you can give credit to Grant Shapps where it's due here.
Oh, well, there we are. So, we've got to number 6. Let's have a look at what some of you are saying on the YouTubes. Lots of people saying there was a good question. It required a specific number. Sunak responds with blather and shouting. He can't even answer a factual question. And then Terry says, for God's sake, Stum, we all know how many asylum claims have not been processed. Waste of another question. I'm not sure about that. I think asking a question which Rishi Sunak doesn't answer, then pointing out it's only 4%. Quite a funny line as well about how Suella Braverman's got more chance of becoming the next Tory leader than she has of processing an asylum claim is also quite nice. Right, let's go back to the House of Commons. There's the last question, PMQs unpacked from Keir Starmer. Question number 6.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about my time as Director of Public Prosecutions. I prosecuted people smugglers. He can't even get an asylum claim processed. I think the answer to the question whether the Home Secretary received legal advice to move people out of Marsden is yes. He just hasn't got the guts to say it. He did a grubby deal with her, putting her in charge of Britain's security just so he could dodge an election. She's broken the ministerial code, lost control of a refugee centre and put our security at risk. She did get one thing right. She finally admitted that the Tories have broken the asylum system. Criminal gangs running amok. Thousands crossing the Channel in small boats every week. Hardly any claims processed. So why doesn't he get a proper Home Secretary, scrap the Rwanda gimmick, crack down on smuggling gangs, end the small boat crossings, speed up asylum claims and agree an international deal on refugees? Start governing for once and get a grip.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman.
Front rows. Can we just calm it down a little? I do want to hear the replies. You're covering your mouth's not helpful to me or you. Come on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman rightly raised the topic of national security, because it is important. But this is the person who in 2019 told the BBC, and I quote, "I do think Jeremy Corbyn would make a great Prime Minister." Mr. Speaker, let's remember that national security agenda, abolishing our armed forces, scrapping the nuclear deterrent, withdrawing from NATO, voting against every single anti-terror law we tried, befriending Hamas and Hezbollah. He may want to forget about it, but we will remind him of it every week, because it's the Conservative government that will keep this country safe.
Wowzers. Quite a lot to unpack there. So some people pointing out on the YouTube channel, Patrick, that list there by the end from Keir Starmer was basically a Labour plan. I mean, there were interesting questions about exactly how you do that, but drop the Rwanda gimmick, stop the small boats crossing, crack down on gangs, process more claims. That was a shopping list of things that the government isn't doing.
Yes, and obviously the mechanism by which you do those things, particularly stop the boats and process more claims, that the devil is in that detail. But as you say, as a checklist of things on which the government has incontrovertibly failed, what the Labour Party would claim to do better. It's a very pithy. You can fit that on one of Tony Blair's pledge cards.
You could put it on a pledge card. And it's the sort of thing that if you did do that, people would look at it and think, well, that looks like a plan.
Yeah.
You can get into the weeds of whether or not it actually work and the details of it, but it's a decent thing. And then in response,
and also it's all stuff you can say with a straight face of the Labour Party and say we're not bleeding heart lefties, right?
Yeah.
You say, well, look, we don't want to waste money on the Rwanda plan.
It's not working.
That's that sounds delicious. That's not fiscally credible. It's not working. What a waste of money. This profligate lot. And then the rest of it is all, tough on borders.
What is interesting, actually, Keir Starmer talked about was £140 million being spent on the Rwanda plan. That's 3 times what they're currently spending on hotels. So, just to put it into the context.
And not a single flight.
And not a single flight is taken off, despite it being Suella Braverman's dream. And then the flip side, the response from Rishi Sunak, reaching for Jeremy Corbyn. And he says, we will remind him every week. Is that going to work, do you think, as the biographer of the Corbyn years?
Look, the short answer is I think the salience of Jeremy Corbyn decreases with every passing week, especially with every passing week of the government being seen to behave in the chaotic way that it has done. The interesting question will be whether Labour can neutralise those attacks at election by having plans that deal with Corbyn's Achilles heel, which is to say security, Brexit, the economy, and stuff like immigration. Not that Corbyn's policy platforms were necessarily all sort of dyed-in-the-wool hard left on this stuff. It was because of the perception, what the Times column on Monday called the vibe of Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah. But also, Keir Starmer, the next election, will say, I've kicked him out of the party.
Yes.
He's not even standing as a Labour MP.
I kicked him out of the party. Look at my platform. We've got rid of it. It's what, and I think that he's done that phase pretty successfully. It's what his aides call they've got the barnacles off the boat. They've got rid of Jeremy Corbyn. They've moved away from his positions on national security. They're in the process of doing so on the economy, and that means it'll be trickier. It'll be tricky beyond the attack lines.
And also, in 2019, Rishi Sunak backed Boris Johnson. It was not a hugely popular position either with the general public. You're going to keep going back and back and back. But I fear we may have settled into the new normal of
it's two men.
Sunak's responses.
It's two straight-laced men shouting at cross purposes.
Yeah, we need a bit of pitch modulation, don't we? That sort of one Rishi Sunak being very shouty is a bit much.
Yeah, it's a not ineffective parliamentary style, because it means your party is united behind you.
Yeah.
It's quite wise that he's not staked out divisive positions in either of these sessions of PMQs that will result in the parliamentary party doing anything but whooping and hollering behind him.
Yeah. Well, there we are. That is the end of PMQs Unpacked. Up next, we'll bring you the best of the rest. I don't, but somebody else listens to all the backbench contributions, and so you don't have to. And we'll just bring you the best of them. We'll do that next after we get the very latest news from Rachel Jewell.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Good afternoon. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has gone straight in at PMQs, questioning who broke the asylum system. His comments come as efforts continue to move detainees out of the